The hospital was busy, phones ringing, pagers buzzing, nurses moving quickly from one hallway to another, clipboards in hand and eyes set on the next emergency. But in the far corner of the waiting room, beneath a flickering fluorescent light, sat an elderly woman. Her name was Rosa Ellis, 82 years old, thin frame, a soft floral dress she wore every time she had an appointment. Her hair, mostly gray now, was tied neatly into a bun, and her small black purse rested quietly in her lap. She didn't take up much space. She never had. She just waited, quietly, respectfully, like she'd been taught all her life to do. And yet no one noticed her. Not when she first arrived. Not when she asked if someone could check her appointment. Not even when she whispered that her chest felt tight and her breathing didn't feel right. "Take a seat, ma'am," the front desk clerk said without looking up. "You'll be called when it's your turn." So she did. That was nearly 2 hours ago. Now her hands were beginning to tremble. She looked down at her fingers. The tips tingled, and her palms were cold despite the heat in the room. Her heart was beating fast, not from panic, but from something deeper, something that didn't feel quite right. She reached again for help. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I'm really not feeling well." The nurse behind the counter barely glanced up. "I told you we'd call you. We're short-staffed today. There are emergencies ahead of you." A young man in his 20s, clearly with a sprained ankle, hobbled past her and was taken in instantly. She said nothing, just nodded, folded her hands again, waited. Because Rosa Ellis had lived long enough to know how the world worked and what it didn't want to see. A frail old woman. Black skin, no fancy title, no loud voice, no urgent status. She was easy to overlook, and that's exactly what they did. But she was growing tired, her breath more shallow, her vision blurrier than it had been when she walked in. Her phone, an old flip model, buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out with shaking fingers and hit the call button with the name, Mikey. He picked up on the first ring. "Grandma," he said, voice warm but alert. "Everything okay?" There was a pause before she answered. "I don't think they're going to see me," she said softly. "I told them I wasn't feeling well. I tried, Mikey. I really did." He was silent for a second. Then his voice dropped, calm and deliberate. "Nora, where are you?" "Still in the waiting room." "I'm on my way." She tried to protest. "No, honey, you don't have to." But he had already hung up. 15 miles away, Michael Ellis stood in a boardroom surrounded by venture capitalists and advisors. Charts lined the screens. A $12 million partnership was being negotiated. But the moment he heard her voice, the fatigue, the fear, none of it mattered. He closed his laptop, stood up, and spoke only 3 words. "Reschedule a meeting." One of his executives looked confused. "Michael, this is a major investor." Michael didn't even look back. "She called me." Those 3 words were enough. Everyone in that room knew who she was. Because everyone in his life knew that Rosa Ellis wasn't just his grandmother. She was the reason he built his company in the first place. The stories she told him as a kid, about being turned away from clinics as a black woman in the South, about being told she was too emotional when she was actually in pain, about burying a sister who died waiting on a doctor that never came. He hadn't just listened to those stories. He built his mission from them. Elix Health wasn't just a company. It was a promise that no one, no matter their skin, age, or income, would be left waiting in silence again. And right now, the woman who taught him that promise was waiting. Back at the hospital, Rosa was starting to lean forward. Her hand was pressed to her chest. Her breathing shallowed. Still, no one came. But then, the glass doors at the front of the hospital opened with a swift gust of wind. In walked a tall man in a black overcoat, his pace quick but controlled. Michael scanned the room once, locked eyes with his grandmother, and moved. In 2 long strides, he was at her side. "Grandma," her eyes softened. "Mikey." He took her hand gently, then turned to the nurse's desk. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but steel-edged. "My grandmother has been waiting here for over 2 hours with chest pain. I need a doctor. Now." The nurse looked up, for the first time truly looking at him. "We've had a few emergencies come in," she began. "I understand," he said, his voice cutting just enough. "But you'll treat her now, or I will make sure this entire situation is on the front page of every healthcare ethics journal in the country." Another nurse stepped forward. "I'm sorry, sir. Who exactly are you?" He reached into his coat, pulled out a sleek black business card, and placed it gently on the desk. The gold letters gleamed. "Michael J. Ellis, founder and CEO, Elix Health Systems." The nurse blinked. The receptionist swallowed. Within 2 minutes, Rosa was in a private exam room with 2 nurses, a cardiologist, and a diagnostic team. Because suddenly, she mattered. Suddenly, she was someone. But Michael knew better. She had always been someone. It just took his name for them to remember. Inside the exam room, Rosa lay still. Her chest had been wired to monitors. Her blood pressure was being taken. A nurse gently checked her pupils with a penlight, while another inserted an IV with practiced speed. The shift in energy was palpable, the kind of urgency that should have been there 2 hours ago. But now it was a performance. Because now someone important was watching. Michael stood at the edge of the room, jaw tight, arms folded across his chest. He didn't say much, just watched every movement, every beep of the monitor, every unnecessary delay. He wasn't angry. He was focused. He had seen this before, not just in his grandmother's story, but in data, in hundreds of thousands of data points his own company had tracked. Elderly Black patients wait 40% longer for attention in ERs. Complaints about pain from Black women are dismissed twice as often. An unconscious bias kills more quietly than disease ever could. He had built Alex Health to fight that, but today that fight had arrived in his own bloodline. When the cardiologist stepped in, white coat crisp, expression neutral, he extended his hand politely. "Mr. Ellis, it's an honor. I followed your work." Michael didn't shake it. "She could have died in that lobby," he said. "You understand that, right?" The doctor's smile faltered. "Yes, and we're truly sorry. There seems to have been—" "No," Michael interrupted. "There wasn't a misunderstanding. There was a system, and it worked exactly how it was built to." The room went quiet. Just the soft hiss of oxygen and the steady blip of the heart monitor. The doctor cleared his throat. "We're doing everything we can now." Michael finally looked him in the eye. "Now," he repeated, then turned and walked out. Down the hallway, Michael headed straight for the administrator's office. His assistant, who had been trying to reach him about rescheduling his VC call, caught up with him just outside the elevators. "Mike, I got the director of operations on the line. He's in a meeting." Michael took the phone. "Tell him I'm here, and I'm not leaving." 10 minutes later, a hastily gathered group of hospital executives sat around a long glass table. Some wore suits, others lab coats. Most looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. Michael stood at the head of the table. No slides, no pitch deck, just presence. He dropped a thick folder onto the table. Inside that is a 1-year breakdown of patient response times at this hospital. Compared to demographic data you probably don't even track. A few brows raised. "This is your hospital's problem in numbers," he continued. "And this morning, it became my family's problem too." The head of HR spoke first. "We're very sorry about your grandmother's experience." Michael raised a hand. "This isn't about apologies, it's about accountability." He opened the folder. Page after page showed data charts, surveys, internal feedback loops from whistleblowers, and notes from frontline nurses. "This isn't the first time someone like her got ignored. It's just the first time someone like me showed up to notice." The room fell silent. Michael let the silence sit. It was more powerful than shouting. Then he laid out his terms. "For every staff member, from janitorial to chief of medicine, not a checkbox course, a real measurable training with patient outcome tracking. Placed in lobbies and waiting areas, patients can report discrimination in real time via voice or screen input." His company would donate its diagnostic flow software, already in use at major tech hospitals, to analyze triage bias across gender, age, and race. Patients can see estimated wait times by name and condition to eliminate silent sorting based on appearance. He finished with one line: "If your hospital doesn't lead this change, I'll make sure the next hospital does. And the next, until this becomes federal policy." No one interrupted. They couldn't. He wasn't just the CEO of a company. He was the grandson of a woman who had been invisible until he made her seen. An hour later, Michael walked back to Rosa's room. She was awake now, tired but smiling. "You didn't yell, did you?" she asked gently. He chuckled. "No, Grandma, I told the truth. That was enough." She reached for his hand. "1, you know, when I was your age, I never thought we'd see someone like you. Standing in those rooms, making those people listen." Michael's voice softened. "I'm standing because you survived the days they didn't listen at all." Outside, the hospital's automatic doors slid open once more. But this time, they didn't just let people in. They let change in. And for once, it stayed. 1 week later, the hospital was quieter. Not slower, not emptier. Just quieter. Like a place that was finally listening. The front lobby had changed. Not in design, but in tone. The receptionist now made eye contact. The intake nurse had a notebook in her pocket where she scribbled patient notes. Not just symptoms, but names. And on the wall near the waiting room, right above the water dispenser, a new plaque had been installed. It read, "Dignity has no age, care has no color." No one announced it, but everyone saw it. Patients paused to read it. Staff paused to think about it. especially after the email memo from the board hit their inboxes. Subject, new equity and dignity mandates, effective immediately. Michael Ellis' name was mentioned in bold at the top. What followed were 4 action points, the same ones he had delivered in that glass conference room. Now official hospital policy. But outside the bureaucracy, something else was happening. Nurses started checking on quiet patients more often. Doctors stayed in the room 30 seconds longer with elderly patients who came alone. A young Filipino man waiting for a CT scan noticed a white nurse kneel down to explain the process gently to his grandmother, in Tagalog. He didn't know the nurse had gone home the night of Michael's visit and started learning a few phrases. That was the ripple. Not forced, just human. And at the center of that ripple quietly was Rosa Ellis. At home, Rosa was recovering. Her blood pressure had stabilized. Her cardiologist, a different one, called her twice to check in personally. But she still hadn't stopped thinking about that day. About the chair in the lobby, about the silence, and about her grandson walking through those doors like justice in a suit. She sat at the kitchen table, an old journal open in front of her, pen in hand. It wasn't a diary. It was a record of things she never wanted to forget. She wrote, May 3rd, Michael turned the hospital into a courtroom, and the truth won. She underlined it twice, then flipped back 3 pages and added a new photo. It was her and Michael, taken 2 days earlier, standing beside the plaque in the hospital lobby. She had one hand on her walker, the other held tightly to his arm, both of them smiling, but different smiles. Hers said, I made it. His said, now others can too. Later that week, Michael was invited to a town hall panel on racial equity in healthcare. He almost declined, but Rosa nudged him. You always say policy changes everything, she said, sipping her tea. Now let it. So he did. He stood before medical students, nurses, directors, and patients. The crowd was quiet at first, unsure whether this CEO in a tailored suit could truly speak for them, until he told them the story. Not about business, but about a woman in a floral dress holding her chest in a waiting room while the world looked away. About a grandson who didn't come to shout, but to remember her value out loud. And suddenly the crowd wasn't silent anymore. They nodded, they clapped, some cried. And when he ended with, I'm not asking you to save the world. I'm asking you to stop pretending some people aren't worth saving. There was a standing ovation. Weeks passed. The story made its way into blogs, TikTok explainers, even an NPR podcast. A small headline in the health section of the Times read, From Neglect to Reform, How One Grandson Sparked Hospital Policy Shift. But Michael didn't read any of that. He was too busy building something else. At Alex Health, a new initiative launched, Project ROSA, Real-Time Oversight for Senior Access. Named after the woman who taught him how to listen. It was a smartwatch app for seniors, letting them log symptoms, get triaged remotely, and alert family if ignored in any medical setting. By month's end, 50 hospitals signed on. By year's end, 200. And every single user, upon sign-up, read the same welcome message. You are seen, you are valued, and you will never wait alone again. One evening, Michael drove across town. Rosa was in her garden trimming roses. He walked up with a familiar smirk. Still out working, he said. She glanced back. Still trying to catch up. They laughed. Then he handed her something small, a key-shaped pin with her initials. Project ROSA is live, he said. She blinked back tears. You didn't just help me, she whispered. You built a world where I didn't have to be brave just to exist. Michael nodded. You were brave so I could build it. Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or protests. Sometimes it walks through a hospital door. It asks simple questions with powerful weight. Why was she ignored? Would you have listened if she looked like someone else? And then it changes everything. Because one act of dignity creates 1,000 echoes. And one grandson can rewrite the future of care. Fade to black, end screen with CTA. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone feel seen because of it. Healthcare should heal, not divide. 3 months had passed. The hospital that once ignored Rosa Ellis was now one of the first in the country to pilot full-scale patient equity tracking. Every triage decision, every wait time, every patient satisfaction score, now connected to a dashboard powered by Alex Health. Not just data for boardrooms, data for justice. And the changes didn't stop there. Other hospitals began calling. Medical schools invited Michael to speak. A senator quoted Project ROSA in a health equity hearing. And across TikTok, reels of patients praising their nurses for being actually kind began ending with the same hashtag. Because of Rosa. But Michael didn't care about trending. He cared about Tuesday afternoons, because that was when he'd visit Rosa. She had started teaching a health literacy class at her community center, just once a week. Nothing too fancy, but she always wore her pin, the little silver key with RE engraved in it. She'd open each session with a joke. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I made one of the best ones in the world care about my heartbeat. The room always laughed, but then she'd look them in the eyes. Never let them rush you, never let them ignore you, and never feel small when asking for care. That was her legacy. Not the policy, not the app, not the plaque, but the courage to speak up, passed down, hand to hand, voice to voice. One rainy afternoon, Michael stopped by with lunch. They sat on the porch, rain tapping softly against the roof. Rosa sipped her tea slowly. You know, she said, when I was your age, we didn't talk about dignity. We just endured. Michael looked at her, brow furrowed. She continued. We knew something was wrong, but saying it out loud made it worse. So we taught each other to sit quiet, to say thank you, even when it hurt, to be grateful for almost. She paused. But now, look at you, making hospitals say the word fair like it's a requirement, not a luxury. Michael smiled. Look at us, Grandma. I wouldn't be me without you. Later that night, Michael stood in his home office. A framed photo sat beside his monitor. Rosa, smiling in her church hat, hand on her walker, eyes lit up like she had just told the world a secret. He picked up his phone, scrolled past emails and contracts, opened a draft press release titled, The Rosa Ellis Foundation. He had been working on it for weeks. Scholarships for Black nursing students, microgrants for elder care reform, a mentorship program pairing med students with real patients to shadow. Not just procedures, but feelings. Because medicine, he believed, should begin with story, not charts, not stats, not cold protocols, but real people. People like Rosa. The next morning, he hit send. Within hours, his inbox lit up with support. A well-known philanthropist pledged $1 million. 2 hospital networks wanted early access to the foundation's empathy-based training modules. But none of that meant more than the text he got just before lunch. She just taught her 100th patient class. Still quoting you like scripture, Aunt Lena. Michael chuckled, then stood up, grabbed his blazer, and whispered to himself, she's still teaching me too. 6 months later, Rosa passed peacefully in her sleep. No machines, no chaos, just soft light filtering through her bedroom curtain and the scent of jasmine from the garden. Michael held her hand until the very end. She didn't say much that day. She didn't have to. The work was done. The world had changed, and her legacy was louder than ever. Some stories don't end when the heart stops beating. They echo in every kind nurse, in every patient who refuses silence, in every system that decides we must do better. If you believe healthcare should treat all patients with dignity, share this story. Let Rosa's voice live in every waiting room. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they remind us who we're supposed to be. It was just another busy evening at La Lumiere, the upscale restaurant in the heart of downtown. A place where high-end clientele dined, where the buzz of conversation blended with the clinking of wine glasses and the soft notes of a pianist playing in the background. The staff knew how to cater to every whim, every need. But there was something different about that evening. It was something that would go unnoticed by most, but would mark a turning point for me. For Sarah Williams, a waitress at the restaurant, and for someone I would soon come to know as Mia Carter. It was close to 7:30 p.m. when I first saw her. A young girl, maybe around 12 or 13, sitting alone at a table near the window. Her head was slightly tilted, her hands fumbling over the edges of her menu, but she never once looked up. Her eyes were closed, and her face had a faint, distant look that seemed to suggest she was deep in thought. But something in her demeanor made me pause. She wasn't looking at the menu because she couldn't. She was blind. The hostess, Karen, had seated her as if nothing was unusual, but the girl was alone. No guardian, no parent. I couldn't help but wonder why someone so young was sitting in a place like this all by herself. And it didn't help that the waitstaff had all noticed her too, each one giving their own fleeting glance, but no one doing anything to approach her. I tried to keep my focus on the tables that I had to tend to, the orders that needed to be taken. But the girl, Clara, kept appearing in the corner of my vision. It became impossible to ignore. She had been sitting at that table for nearly 30 minutes now, untouched by the bustle of the restaurant around her. No one had taken her order. No one had offered to assist her. As I walked past her table, I noticed her hands trembling slightly as they reached out for the edge of the table. She had an empty glass in front of her, but no one had refilled it. I knew what I had to do. I had seen her a few times before, but I had never paid much attention to her situation. That night, though, something felt different. I couldn't just pass by. "Hi there," I said softly, leaning in slightly to catch her attention. She looked up at me, her gaze unfocused. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice hesitant but warm. "I think my mom is late. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. It was clear that she was waiting for someone, but there was no one else around. The realization hit me like a wave. She had been left alone. It wasn't just an innocent mix-up. Clara was blind, and she was all alone at a restaurant full of people. "I'm Sarah," I said. "Can I get you something to drink while you wait? Maybe some water or juice?" She nodded, her smile faint but thankful. "Water would be nice." As I moved to refill her glass, I noticed Karen, the hostess, watching me from across the room. Her eyes narrowed as she watched me interact with Clara. I knew she didn't approve. This wasn't the first time I'd gotten a look from her. She wasn't the friendliest person, but today I wasn't backing down. "I'll be right back with your water," I said gently, and went off to get a glass. I couldn't help but think about the situation. Why was she alone? Why had no one come to help her sooner? Was her family caught up with something? I had no answers, but I had the feeling that I wasn't the only one who was noticing the situation. As I returned with the water, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A woman had entered the restaurant, her eyes scanning the room, and then she spotted Clara. The woman was tall, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, and her presence commanded attention. There was something about her that radiated power, but there was no kindness in her gaze as she walked toward Clara's table. "Clara!" the woman called out in a clipped voice, and I immediately recognized her as Mia Carter, the CEO of Bennett Technologies, a massive healthcare firm known for its influence in the tech world. She looked as if she was in a hurry, and her eyes held a sense of impatience. "Mia," Clara said, her voice sounding more confused than relieved. "Are you here?" Mia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked around the restaurant, her expression tight with frustration. She stood stiffly at the edge of Clara's table, clearly not expecting the circumstances. "Clara, I need to speak with you." "Come on," she said, her voice colder than the temperature of the room. She didn't bother to offer a hand or any assistance. I watched as Clara slowly stood up from the table, her steps uncertain. Mia's voice echoed in the restaurant as she instructed her daughter with such authority, completely ignoring the fact that Clara was blind and had been sitting alone for who knows how long. Something in me stirred. I wasn't sure why, but the way Mia was treating Clara, as if she were a burden, irked me. It was clear that Clara didn't deserve this cold treatment. Mia hadn't even looked at her with the same warmth I had shown. I walked over to the table where Mia stood, and as I approached, Mia turned her head, her sharp eyes catching mine. "What are you doing?" Mia asked, her tone clipped. "I was just checking on her," I said, standing my ground. "She's been waiting for quite a while, and I thought I could help her. I don't think anyone's acknowledged her for the last hour." Mia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned sharply on her heel and walked away, pulling Clara along with her. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing, anger rising within me. I knew Mia Carter had money, power, and influence, but none of that could excuse the way she was treating her daughter or the way she dismissed me in my act of kindness toward Clara. As Mia led Clara away, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of mother abandons her blind daughter like this? What kind of world were we living in where a young girl simply waiting to be seen and heard could be treated like an afterthought? Little did I know that was only the beginning of an experience that would change everything. A few hours later, I would discover just how much Mia's actions, and my own, would come to shape not just Clara's life, but my own too. I would also learn that sometimes being kind isn't just about making things better in the moment. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And that night, I knew I had made a choice, one that would haunt me and challenge everything I had known. It would force me to confront something bigger than myself, something I had never expected, but it was something I was now a part of. The change had already begun. I couldn't stop thinking about Clara, about Mia, about how they both interacted with each other, or rather, how Mia treated her daughter. I had worked at La Lumiere for several months now, but that evening felt different. It felt like I had seen something that most people overlooked, or maybe I was the only one who had noticed it. The next day after my shift ended, I went home and tried to shake the thoughts of what had happened the night before. But it didn't work. The image of Clara sitting alone at that table, the look in her eyes when she smiled up at me, stayed with me. What had Mia been thinking when she walked in? Why had she been so cold? I couldn't understand it. I had no choice but to go back to work. When I arrived, I noticed Karen, the hostess, talking to another server in hushed tones. As soon as I walked by, Karen looked at me briefly, then turned her attention back to her conversation. But the feeling in the air was different today, heavier, more strained. I felt like something was building, something I couldn't quite place. As my shift went on, I was distracted. My mind kept returning to the scene from last night. Finally, around mid-afternoon, I saw her again, Mia Carter. She wasn't in her usual power suit. Instead, she was wearing something more casual, but her presence still commanded attention. She walked into La Lumiere with a look of determination, her face tight with purpose. I froze. I knew she was here for Clara, but I had no idea that I would be the one who would have to face her. Mia approached the counter where Karen was working. I saw Karen stiffen when she noticed Mia standing there, her posture becoming more formal. I couldn't hear the words they exchanged, but the tension in the room was palpable. Mia glanced around and then caught sight of me. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She didn't even nod. Her gaze was steely, calculating. I didn't expect her to approach me, but she did. And when she spoke, her voice was colder than before. "Sarah, isn't it?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost dismissive. "Yes," I replied, standing a little straighter, unsure of what was happening. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Now." My heart raced. What could she possibly want to discuss? Was it because of last night? I had no idea. Mia led me toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the other patrons and staff. I had no idea what I was walking into. All I knew was that this conversation was going to change everything. When we reached the corner, she turned to face me. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "I didn't appreciate how you handled things last night," Mia said bluntly, her tone serious. "That was my daughter, and you didn't need to interfere." I felt a jolt of confusion. "I wasn't interfering," I said, trying to explain. "I just wanted to help." Clara was alone. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes slightly. "And who asked you to help? What made you think you had the right to?" The question hung in the air, and I was at a loss for words. I had acted on instinct. I had done what felt right, but Mia wasn't seeing it that way. "I was just being kind," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. I thought she needed someone to talk to. Mia's gaze softened for a split second, and I could see the faintest flicker of something. Regret, maybe. But it was gone just as quickly. "I know you were trying to help," she said, her voice lowering, "but you don't understand the situation. I'm the one who decides what Clara needs." The air between us grew heavier, and I realized something important. Mia wasn't just upset because I had helped her daughter. There was more to this story. She wasn't upset about the help. She was upset because I had seen something she wasn't ready for me to see. Before I could respond, Mia continued, her tone more somber. "Clara is a burden, Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's a reminder of everything I've done wrong, and I'll do anything to keep people from seeing her as weak." The words struck me like a blow. I couldn't process what Mia was saying. How could she think of her own daughter this way? How could she talk about her with so much coldness, so much distance? "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "She's your daughter. She deserves to be loved, to be treated with respect." Mia stepped back slightly, as though I had struck her with my words. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "You don't understand the pressure, the responsibility, the weight of being a mother to someone like her." I wanted to argue, to tell her how wrong she was, but I didn't. I was too stunned. Mia looked at me for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, before she turned and left the corner, heading straight for the exit. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of confusion and anger boiling inside me. How could a mother feel this way about her child? I went back to my shift in a daze, my mind swirling with everything Mia had said. But one thing stuck out, one thing that Mia had mentioned that I couldn't shake: the burden. She saw her daughter as a burden, and I couldn't just let that go. That night after my shift, I decided to find out more. I didn't know what Mia was hiding, but I was determined to learn the truth. For Clara, for myself. And I wasn't about to let this story end with unanswered questions. The only thing I knew for sure was that something needed to change. And I was going to be part of that change. As I stood there, alone in the quiet of the restaurant, I made a vow to myself. I wouldn't let Clara be invisible anymore, no matter what it took. The journey was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The following days after that conversation with Mia were filled with uncertainty and restlessness. I couldn't get the look on her face out of my mind, nor could I forget the way she described her daughter, Clara. A burden. How could any mother see their own flesh and blood in that way? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Clara deserved so much more. She deserved to feel seen, loved, and accepted. Determined to learn more about Clara and uncover the truth about Mia's behavior, I began to keep an eye on the restaurant. Every time Clara came in, I watched her closely, not out of pity, but out of a deep sense of empathy and curiosity. What was her life really like? How did she feel about her mother? And why did Mia treat her the way she did? One day, while I was wiping down a table in the corner of the restaurant, I saw Clara and Mia walking toward the entrance. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the tension in the air, even from a distance. Mia was walking several paces ahead of Clara, as usual. Clara was walking slowly, her cane tapping lightly against the floor with each step. It was clear she wasn't just physically blind, but emotionally distant from the woman who was supposed to protect and nurture her. I felt my chest tighten as I watched them. I was supposed to just be a server, a bystander, but this felt different. I couldn't just stand there and ignore it anymore. I needed to do something. I wasn't sure what, but I knew I couldn't keep watching Clara suffer. As they sat down at their usual table, Mia ordered with her usual coldness. But it wasn't just the way she spoke to the waiter that bothered me. It was the way she treated Clara. I could see the tension between them. Clara was trying to speak to her mother, but Mia barely acknowledged her. It was as if Clara didn't exist, at least not in any meaningful way. Once the meal arrived, Mia immediately buried her nose in her phone, ignoring Clara completely. But Clara was different. She had a sense of awareness about the world around her that was almost heartbreaking. She tried to engage with the meal, reaching for the glass of water, but her movements were tentative, careful. It struck me. Clara was trying, despite the isolation her mother forced upon her. I couldn't take it anymore. I approached their table cautiously, trying to hide my growing frustration. "Clara, would you like some help with that?" I asked softly. Her head turned in my direction, and she smiled faintly.